French forces attack groups linked to Al-Qaeda in West Africa. President François Hollande says he's battling a terrorist threat on Europe's doorstep. He says the campaign in northern Mali will take as long as necessary. But fighters are warning it'll be France's Afghanistan and its downfall. Hello there, I'm Shuli Ghosh. You're with Inside Story. The battle to retake Mali's north has begun in earnest. Hundreds of French troops have been deployed and French airstrikes have already driven back Islamist rebels from the town of Konna. France moved swiftly when fighters swept south towards the capital, Bamako. West African nations have also scrambled their troops, with soldiers from Niger, Senegal, Burkina Faso and Nigeria mobilised by ECOWAS. Several rebel groups linked to Al-Qaeda are operating in northern Mali. They spread through the territory after a destabilising coup in the capital Bamako 9 months ago. France's president says their presence is a major security threat.
La France, à la demande du président du Mali.
At the request of the president of Mali and respecting the United Nations Charter, France yesterday committed itself to support the Malian army against terrorist aggression that threatens all of West Africa.
Grâce au courage de nos soldats.
Thanks to the courage of our soldiers, a halting blow was brought to bear and heavy losses were inflicted on our adversaries. But our mission is not yet accomplished.
But one of the groups the French are fighting gave this warning.
We have tanks, armoured vehicles, anti-aircraft guns, Grad rocket launchers and other weapons. We've already managed to down a French aircraft, which everyone has now heard about. But know this, we fight the French with the same weapons as our brothers fought their invaders in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our faith in God, by His will, Azawad will be the Afghanistan of the region and France's downfall.
So let's bring in today's guests. In Paris, Emmanuel Dupuy, president of the Institute for Perspective and Security in Europe. Joining me here in Doha is Amel Boubekeur, visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Centre, focusing on North African politics. And from Oxford in the UK, David Anderson, Professor of African Politics at Warwick University. A warm welcome to all three of you. Emmanuel, let me start with you. How are we to view this French operation in Mali? Is this a major offensive, an invasion? What is it?
Well, it's basically a counter-terrorist operation, as President Hollande stated yesterday in his intervention. As you know, we have engaged a certain number of military disposal, aircraft support mostly, and what is quite clear, it's not an invasion. We're acting under United Nations mandate. We have the important thing for the audience to understand is that we're not participating in a bilateral or unilateral operation. We're just fulfilling what the international community has always said. We're preparing on the ground the intervention of the ECOWAS mission, was supposed to be on the ground in a certain number of months or days, and we're not willing to undertake that mission.
The French have speeded things up, though, haven't they? Because the United Nations was quite clear that it would have preferred to follow a process which would have meant any kind of action would have taken place not until September. And ECOWAS has been so slow in sending any troops. So the French action has really galvanised the international community to do something, hasn't it?
Absolutely, but in no case the United Nations has said that it was going to wait for September. The situation, the geological situation or the geographic situation has convinced everyone that it cannot be done before September on behalf of the summer season. What is important is that the events have been a bit accelerating in these recent days. As you know, there was the Malian army offensive, which was and is a reality against the columns of the Al-Qaeda-linked insurgents, and we had to intervene because the Malian army was defeated.
Okay, Amel, I know that you met President Hollande, didn't you? I think last month you met him in Paris and you discussed this very eventuality. What was he saying?
Well, the thing is that indeed that has been presented like a very anti-terrorist move, and I think that France is deeply concerned by the erection of, or the potential erection of, an Islamist state. But the thing is that the way it has been conducted, in my opinion, may not resolve all the matters and all the problems France is faced with. For example, the problems of the hostages. I mean, France, of course, it was conducted by the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy. So François Hollande, as the new president, has to find his own marks in terms of how to deal with the issue of the hostages. Remember that we still have 8 French hostages there. Also, with regard to the international community, for example, it may be difficult to explain for France in the future why they have chosen to go ahead without, for example, the agreement of the parliament, without having consulted with the parliament before, and also with the international community in a much more formal way. For example, Russia has been saying that France has not been respectful of the United Nations agreement and rules. So it may be a little bit tricky for France in the future to justify this intervention.
Well, what France is saying, Amel, as I know that you're aware, is that France is saying that the growth of these, what they call Al-Qaeda linked groups in northern Mali are a threat to security, a threat to not only the West African region, but a threat to Europe. Just how strong are these groups?
I think they are much more a threat for Mali and themselves than for France or for Europe. But the thing is true that François Hollande, as a new president, has also to invent a new foreign policy toward Africa. If you look at a territory like Mali, for example, or other African countries, France has to some extent lost his predominancy on this country. So France has to find a new place in this country. France has to find a new role to play. And well, for now it's still war, but I think the much more important thing for France will be to be able to convey a major political dialogue within the various factions in place in Mali, and that's not going to be easy.
David, I saw you were nodding earlier on. I mean, how is this incursion by French forces going to be viewed in the region and in Europe?
I think the French have got some diplomatic difficulties to navigate here. But firstly, let's think about why they've gone in now. What has made this happen at this time? And the answer to that question is that in the last 10 days or so, there's been quite a serious rebel incursion to the south and west, and the Malian army has tried to halt it but failed.
The Malian army is pretty ill-equipped to deal with this entire incursion anyway, isn't it? It's not been able to deal with them at all.
Indeed, and it's no surprise that the Malian army has failed. So the advance by the rebels was itself a serious step. Now that came in the context of ECOWAS and the African Union being unable to get its act together to organise a substantive intervention before the autumn. Now, having made that public and having said this in several international announcements, the other African nations effectively gave the rebels a blank cheque. It told them when any action could take place and gave them a date by which they knew they could make advances and take up much more strongly defensible positions.
Why was ECOWAS so slow in dealing with this? Why doesn't the West African bloc deal with West African problems?
I think there are some issues of politics here. I think there are also some issues of allocations. Over in East Africa, the interventions in Somalia have been funded almost entirely by the European Union. So the West African governments have to some extent been hoping that some fairy godmother would come in, wave the magic wand and pay for this operation. Now that has been part of the delaying tactics that have gone on. There have been other local issues about whether these militaries are ready to roll or not. But what's happened in the last week is that the French have talked very intensively to their ally in Côte d'Ivoire, President Ouattara, who they helped restore into power last year. And he has galvanized and reorganized the ECOWAS response. And we now have an accelerated response from ECOWAS, with them apparently able to get a much smaller force than they'd originally intended, of perhaps 3,500 African troops, into the field in the next few days.
Okay.
And they are likely to come from Niger, from Nigeria, from Burkina Faso.
And Nigeria, yeah. Let's just take a quick look at who's who in Mali. MNLA and Ansar Dine were the two major Tuareg groups involved in the takeover of the north of Mali. That was after the coup back in March. Ansar Dine say they're not fighting for independence. Rather, they want Islamic law or Sharia across the country. Now, they have close ties to other small groups, including Mujau, the Movement for Unity and Jihad in West Africa. They also want to introduce Islamic law. Now, both these groups are said to have links to al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. The other major armed group is the secular National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, the MNLA. Now, they made the initial grab for territory after the coup last March, and they want an independent state for the Tuareg, but recently they've been driven to the sidelines by Ansar Dine, and they haven't been involved in the latest advances. Amel, clearly the power vacuum in Bamako allowed these armed groups to expand their power base. Ansar Dine says it doesn't have any ties to al-Qaeda. So what are we to believe?
Well, the thing is that even if Ansar Dine is using for sometimes now an Islamist and a jihadi narrative, we have to remind ourselves that at the beginning, the real reason were really independency of the northern territories. Remember, for example, we have to outline that the chief of Ansar Dine is a former Tuareg chief. So even if they have been using this jihadi narrative, this was much more to gain alliances than, being convinced like other groups, other minor groups they are fighting with, linked to al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. This was much more in order to overthrow and to gain control over the country, rather than being originally a pure jihadi group. Now they are considered like a pure jihadi group. For example, a very interesting strategy was the one of Algeria that has failed, by the way, which aimed at trying to separate or to make a rupture between Ansar Dine and the other jihadi groups. It has failed totally. Why? Because no alternative was offered to this Ansar Dine group. So really now the challenge is to being able to discuss with this group on a common platform. For example, if you look at what the rebels, the Tuareg, the secular ones of Al-Awazad have tried to discuss with Ansar Dine, their main opposition point, or the main point they didn't agree on, was really about having a secular or a Sharia-driven country. So we should go beyond this kind of opposition between, in one hand, secular actors and on the other hand jihadi ones, in order to find what could be the future of the country and how political dialogue could be on the scene again.
Let me just bring in some tweets that we've had on the subject of the French operation in Mali. As Salafi says, these neo-imperialist powers come with the false pretext of democracy and destroy nations. And Zoidal says France has done stuff like this repeatedly in former colonies. Why should this be any different? Emmanuel, the clear sentiment seems to be that France is doing this for its own interests.
Well, that's not quite true, because as we have been mentioning during the show and in every time we are speaking about the situation, again, we are preparing on the ground the installation of the AFISMA, the African-led mission. That's one issue. We have to take in consideration that what is going on now is the help of the French forces throughout air sustain. There have been airplane fighters, who have been sent from Chad. We're not on the ground. There's not, as we say, boots on the ground. It's not an invasion. It's not an interposition force.
They are in Bamako. There are French troops. We've seen pictures of French troops arriving in the capital.
100 of our French military have been sent
in Mopti
coming
and
from
Bamako.
Ouagadougou.
Sorry, David, what are you saying?
Sorry?
Well, I'm saying there are 550 French troops in Bamako and Mopti. So they're deployed already, over 500.
Yeah, well,
they are in Bamako, and others are in Mopti. Mopti is in the north near Kona.
And what do you say to that, Emmanuel?
Yes, please. Can I precise? Yes, I'm precising that in Mopti and in Kona, the special forces are present, and this is a clear fact. And again, a certain number of actors have mentioned it, Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister. And as our colleague was saying, we have called for more French troops in order to assess and to protect the population of Bamako. You have to take in consideration that the Malian army has been deployed basically on the north frontier.
But Emmanuel, sorry, if I can just press this point.
The south weakened.
France does have a huge amount of investment in West Africa, doesn't it? And one of the things it will be thinking about is continued access to mineral wealth, oil, uranium, all those kind of things. So when it talks about security in West Africa, it's also talking about its own reasons for being in West Africa.
Well, it's an ongoing debate. You have to take in consideration that France may have economical interest, but others do have the same interest. I'm speaking about the Italians, who have oil swaps in the northern western part of
But the Italians
Mali.
aren't the ones who've gone in.
We're not the only ones. Yes, but again, I hope everyone is quite aware that we're not just protecting our economic interests, because we're not invading any sort of, we're not doing an invasion mission.
David, what do you think, David?
Because it's an ongoing question.
No, I appreciate it. I just want to ask David, because one of the things that people are saying is that this is France getting involved in an entrenched, prolonged conflict, potentially, and people are questioning why France is getting involved.
Well, I think it would be wrong to imagine that this is the same kind of intervention that France has made in Africa in the past. I think the context here is rather different. But let's be very clear. No country takes such actions without vested interests. If there were not 6,000 French citizens in Mali, if there were not substantial French business interests in Mali, this would not be an issue for them. So, of course, there are interests. And I think the argument that this is to do with fighting al-Qaeda also needs to be seen as a little bit of a convenient argument. In West Africa, al-Qaeda is not the issue. Al-Qaeda is our Western obsession. In Mali, as our colleague has explained from Doha, there are a number of political issues around with Islamic groups that have been around for many years. There are a number of nationalist issues that are fueled by Islamic concerns about Sharia and the way that society is organized. These are far more important in Mali than al-Qaeda ever is. And if we in the West want to analyze the Mali situation through al-Qaeda, we are deluding ourselves.
Amel, I saw that you wanted to jump in there. What's your point?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the main important things for France would have been to stabilize political transition above all. I mean, if you look actually at the military, they have not, and the army, the Malian army has not been able to stabilize the country since the coup d'etat. They have not been efficient neither at the political level nor on the ground level. So basically, okay, I understand that they needed France, but France has also to stabilize the political transition. For example, what are going to be the challenges next? I mean, we understand that it's a war that is here for long, that is here for real, that is going to take time. It's not just an intervention to push back the Islamists and then France will take back its troops. I don't think so. So the challenge really will be to what are we going to do with the Tuareg rebellion? I mean, are we going to discuss with them? Are we going to allow them to to establish an independent state? Are we going to focus on Malian unity and stability? How are we going to deal with the Islamist groups? I mean, all the questions need to be answered by France, because France has been willing to put itself as the main actors for resolving the conflict in Mali, and I'm not sure that France has the response to the political ones.
Let me put that to Emmanuel, because I know that he wants to answer that point. And Emmanuel, the question is, what is France going to do above and beyond the military operation? Because there is clearly political uncertainty in Bamako. I mean, they've just replaced their Prime Minister last month. So something needs to be done to establish some kind of transition in Bamako. What is France going to do above and beyond the military operation?
Well, France has done a lot. As Abel has mentioned, we are fulfilling to sustain the political dialogue and all of the mediation which have been going on in the past, both in Ouagadougou with the president of the country and then in Algeria. As it was mentioned, the MNLA is in an ongoing dialogue with French diplomacy. As it was mentioned, we are fulfilling, as the United Nations 2085 mandate precises, to pursue the political dialogue through and to the elections in April, which will take place in Bamako. So we are not just doing a military operation, we are helping the Malians to determine what should be the nature of the state. I just wanted to add that MNLA has done a significant change, a very recent significant change. They have finished their Congress, which took place between Christmas and New Year's Eve, saying that they want to go back to dialogue, but they were saying that there were no actors willing to do so in Bamako. I also want to add that it's not quite sure who started the offensive, the recent offensive. We do know that Captain Sonogo, who was the author of the coup in March 2012, was willing to do a show of force before ECOWAS mission would go inside the Malian territory. So again, it's not quite sure whether or not the Malians have maybe had their own agenda, and that they pursued their own agenda and they sort of jeopardized the ongoing international coalition which was going to take place.
David, so wheels within wheels. Where do we see this going?
Well, we have to ask the question, what is France's exit strategy? They don't go into a conflict of this kind without having intentions and goals. And my best guess would be that their intention is to try and establish a stable regime in Mali, because they are worried that Mali instability will cause a long-term regional problem that will affect their interests very directly and will affect international interests. So these are good motives, but how do you achieve them? I'm interested that Emmanuel mentioned the elections planned for April. Well, it'll be a small miracle if the French manage to overcome their enemies so that those elections can take place in a free and fair atmosphere by April. Good luck with that. I think it's a tough call. I think it's more likely that those elections might be postponed. And it might be better if they were postponed.
Just very briefly, because we are coming to the end of this show, Emmanuel, does the French public have the stomach for another conflict? The French troops have only just come out of Afghanistan.
Well, the French public is very preoccupied by the fact that we lost a soldier. It's important for the audience to understand that we still have 8 hostages, and that at the same time we did, and there's no link to that, an operation to liberate another of our hostage, which was in Somalia. So the French audience and the French political representatives are following the President Hollande's stand on that, and that is quite sure. We have to mention that on the contrary of what Abel said, the Constitution allows anyone to do an operation only if in 3 days, there was the weekend, the Parliament is informed, and this will be the case on Monday. So we are in a legitimate and, again, legal framework.
We're going to have to leave it there. A really interesting discussion. Thank you very much indeed to all my guests, Emmanuel Dupuy, Amel Boubekeur and David Anderson. Now, if you want to tweet us your thoughts, I'm HackHound, or you can email insidestory@aljazeera.net. And you can stay up to date with this story and more on our website, aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye-bye for now.